she said that she thought that maybe the government believe that we're doing the cultural offset. That's why she said,
Yeah,
yeah,
cover both bases. Yeah, I think we were trying to figure out how they actually in tandem or in support or contradiction.
yeah,
I think thinking about like the Marxist-Leninist idea of what art was, as something decadent or something that's propaganda based. What is the theory of mind?
yeah.
I think all of us were kind of putting out like maybe activisms are especially diffuse. So like there are multiple lines and multiple things.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're not manifesto based or literal.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good things to try to figure out.
Yeah, we should have more time. They only gave us 10 minutes each.
Oh.
And then maybe half an hour talk back. Yeah.
So they're gonna put it online?
I think it's online already. I haven't checked. That was pretty interesting. Like it started out institutional, but it started loosening up in the Q&A.
Yeah. Do you read any of the stuff like Gary?
Oh, hey, everything's way back. Yeah.
He's third world studies is what the movement wanted as far as third world knowledge. But then the ethnic studies treated it more watered down.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of nationalist in a way. Kind of crypto nationalist. Yeah, I think that's something that people were touching on in different panels, but it was like a big elephant in the room. Right? Because like, people talk about diaspora or imperialism or third world nationalism, but bracket is Asian American, blah blah blah.
Well, I guess it's always good for younger generations to kind of connect. Otherwise, it might be like, oh, it's just all to us for nothing.
At least our panel, we're like, wait, this is not real, and then things strangely real all of a sudden. So that's, we want to dig deeper in that. There might be another form for it.
The Berkeley's having, I guess, a student development office, the Asian Pacific student development office. They want to have a similar topic.
That'd be good. It's really, it's a tangle too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before we were all on the outside, kind of a little bit you get you have to watch it.
Yeah.
Oh, you should say this.
Yeah, I think that's why like the Godzilla thing is interesting as a history, but for me it's like return to reformism and inclusion, whereas maybe before 70s is about autonomy.
Yeah.
Kind of like post-revolution, transformation, still like, so it's like for me it's an artifact of time, that transition. Before DEI stuff, before, we were trying in the 90s where in the arts, they were trying to, they were hopeful about reformism, but it's like, yeah.
Check, check. 1, 2, 3. Hello, everybody. Remember to talk loud and talk into the microphone, or you won't get picked up.
Would you like to sit in the middle?
Betty goes in the middle. If you're comfortable with that, of course.
Howie should be in the middle.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No, I think I'm a moderator, so no, please.
Rock, paper, scissors.
I feel good over here. Please. Hand it up.
In the middle.
Oh, Cheryl, you have some water?
Yes.
That'll be great.
Actually, and you do.
Sorry.
No worries.
Slide on in, Daddy, or- I'm gonna keep my mask on too.
I know, I thought you yesterday with your mask on.
I realized
That
that
was
in the group picture, conference picture of all the attendees, I forgot to take my mask off for even the group picture. So they just posted the picture of like that one guy.
Oh, really?
Did you notice that?
I didn't even see it.
They just posted. I was like, oh, whoops. I feel like Walter Cronkite here.
Well, then that makes you distinctive. The guy with the mask is Howie.
Oh boy.
Look at that. Wow.
Or I could be Howard Cosell too, like this.
Oh, how does this work?
What time is there?
Do you need a sound check?
Check.
Oh, you've already got water.
But I appreciate
Sherry, need a sound check?
You guys,
Check. Hello.
Hello? Are we on?
Get closer. Do you want us to check? That's
Hello? Is this one on? This is not on. They're all on? Can you hear? Doesn't seem like it's on, is it? Hello? Can you hear? Are we on? Okay. I'm Arlan Huang. We're at the Eastwind Bookstore. That's on, right? Yes, it is. Okay.
Trying to make it sound.
Yeah, great. What's your name?
John.
John, Arlan.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
So I think I'm much louder than Arlen. Maybe is that okay?
Oh, no, that's fine. Be loud.
No.
Go there that way.
Oh, it's a full house. Is that it?
Yeah, nice. Check.
What's that? Okay.
Are you loud enough?
Am I on? What?
you want to sing?
Sing?
Sing
Yeah,
loud.
hold a note. Okay, ready? That sounds great.
Okay. They printed out this thing.
What is this?
What?
My remarks for this, I can
Oh, good. You can read it.
better on phone.
Cannot read that. Yeah. And
I like the drama of this microphone.
I know.
It's like,
Mike is drama.
it is. Or it could be just calling a horse race with this.
Yeah, right. Why didn't you talk like that? Oh my gosh. I had such a hard time parking.
Oh, you did, yeah. It's Sunday, right?
Yeah, I went into the garage after 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Hey, Harvey, do you want to do the intro? Everyone, give it up for Harvey Dong.
Harvey Dong.
You should say welcome to Eastwind Books, and then I'll do the landing knowledge.
Okay. Well, my name's Harvey,
Harvey!
and I'm with Eastwind Books of Berkeley, and my wife, Bea, and I have run it for over 20 years now, and it has connections with a lot of areas that are deep to our understanding of where things are at. And basically, the bookstore is a community-based bookstore that gives voice to the community, the Asian Americans, people of color, and all pressed peoples. The book that's we're going to be talking about today was introduced by Betty Kano here, Godzilla, and we have the three speakers today. Arlan,
Huang.
Howie Chen.
Betty Kano.
Betty Kano.
How is the editor?
And how is the editor? Okay. So just welcome, and next will be a land acknowledgement. Okay.
Thank you, Harvey. Harvey Dong, everybody. All right, before we begin, we must begin with a land acknowledgement. So Eastwind Books of Berkeley recognizes that Berkeley sits on the territory of the Haitian, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation from this land since the institution's founding. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the store's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, my partner, John. Is that better? By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold our store more accountable to the needs of the American Indian and Indigenous peoples. Wow, thank you guys so much for being here. I am so excited. The Asian American Arts Network has been something I have just been diving so deep in the past few weeks. I've just been reading all of these interviews that Howie's done, reading all about Arlan with your work with the Basement Workshop, Betty and all of her work with the Asian American Arts Network. You guys are just so inspiring to me, and I'm so happy to have you guys here. So I'm going to start by introducing all of them. Howie Chen is a curator and writer based in New York. A founding director of Chen's, a townhouse gallery in Brooklyn, he has held curatorial roles at the Whitney Museum of American Art and MoMA PS1. His writings have been published by Primary Information and Badlands Unlimited and have appeared in magazines such as Artform, Frieze, and Art in America. With artist Mika Tajima, he formed New Humans, a moniker for collaborations with musicians, artists, and designers. Chen is the editor of the anthology Godzilla, Asian American Arts Network 1990 to 2001, published by Primary Information in 2021, and is on the faculty of the NYU Steinhardt School. Yeah! Betty Nabu-Khan is an artist, curator, and lecturer based in Berkeley. Her solo exhibits include the Triton Museum of Art and Mary Porter Sesson Gallery, UC Santa Cruz. She co-founded Art Against Apartheid, Asian American Women Arts Association, and Women of Color Camp. She taught at San Francisco State University. Now, Arlan Huang. Huang?
Yeah, that's good.
That's good?
Yes.
Thanks, Arlan. Is a multidisciplinary artist based in New York City and an active member of Godzilla, the Asian American Arts Network. Through painting and other media, Huang's artistic practice merges with his political activism with personal memory and archival history, often weaving together themes of race and representation with the mystique of abstraction. He most recently joined abolitionists and the Chinatown community in condemning the construction of new jails that involved the Museum of Chinese in America, New York. Huang has exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Drawing Center, Artist Space, Sculpture Center, Taft Museum, and is a recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation's Creating a Living Legacy Award.
Thank you.
Yeah, all right, let's give it up to Arlan, Howie, and Betty.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. I'm excited to be here in such a legendary bookstore amongst such amazing warmth and community. I want to first thank Bea and Harvey for hosting this amazing occasion, and to Cheryl for her care and energy in putting this event together. Of course, I'm super grateful for Betty, who I have had the pleasure to meet through research with Godzilla, and also just be in conversation for the last 10 months on Zoom, and finally being able to meet in 3D, which is really great. And we had such insightful conversations about Godzilla, about current events, and the kind of linking the histories, and even talking about kind of what we're doing in our private practices with art and curating. Betty had the idea of having this Godzilla book event at Eastwind Books, like in our conversations, and Arlan and I happened to be in town for this symposium at the Cantor to kick off the Asian American Art Initiative project. And we were on a panel that I organized called Art Activisms, which was kind of thinking about forms of being active and how we comprise the social through political activity. So what that means collectively, but also on the quantum of activism, which is the individual. Like, how can you live an active life? So that panel was comprised of Arlan, historian Gordon Chang, who was the moderator, filmmaker Tiffany Shaw, and Nancy Hum of Kearney Street Workshop formerly. And I feel fortunate that we have assembled here both representatives of the East and the West Coast component and contingent of Godzilla, because Godzilla, we'll talk more about, was a national network, which was kind of remarkable for something that was pre-internet. You know, the idea that you can communicate. I mean, it's also interesting to think about third world internationalism pre-internet, you know, the ways that people communicated across countries and borders and stuff like that. Of course, I want to also thank you, all of you, for being here on a sunny Sunday afternoon. I know I'm from the East Coast, so like the light here and the landscape is really distracting, so I really appreciate that. So I'm just going to do a brief intro on Godzilla, because like I know that there's like different knowledges of it, and even for people who were in Godzilla, I've learned that people have very specific glimpses into even things that they've been involved in. So I'll just kind of fly through a few things just to give people a sense of the history. So today's chat is going to be on our collective Godzilla, which was a social advocacy group that was formed in the 90s in New York City to bring visibility to Asian Pacific American artists in museums, galleries, and wider culture. So even like the framing of Asian Pacific American you can feel that it's of a certain time period. So there's been API or whatever. We can talk about that later too. So it was about kind of inclusion and visibility was the project, to get artists and writers to be involved in museums, galleries, and wider culture. So it's a very specific project, an art project. Taking the name from the formidable monster lizard in cinema, this group of Asian artists, curators, and writers organized to produce exhibitions, publications, and community collaborations to stimulate social change through art and advocacy. So it was in the channel of art, but there was always kind of pointing out to social transformation of some sort through culture. For me, I was interested in using this particular history with their successes in laying the groundwork for visibility in contemporary art. Social political life of Godzilla, and to provide insight into their ethos and legend, and think about how that might apply or not apply to the present. And I believe that there's much to learn from Godzilla's work, and looking into its history can inform our critical practices, research, and art making today. And I was just kind of talking right before with Harvey about like this idea of looking at Godzilla as a moment of when there was this hopefulness about the idea of reform, you know, like they can reform cultural institutions. You know, this is like a project that's late 80s into the 90s where, you know, it was very different from, let's say, a 70s project where transformation or radical autonomy was a possibility. So it's great to see this as an artifact of like multiculturalism, pre-DEI. There was this kind of idea that institutions can be transformed into something that we want to see. So I'm curious about having that conversation here about how we feel now about, even if this kind of model of reform or radical transformation is not even hold up as a dialectical, I don't know, antithetical project even. How I got to making this book is kind of circuitous. It started out as kind of like a personal project because my entrance into the arts, I think, you know, looking back, and it was during the pandemic, I realized I was enabled by a few people that were in Godzilla, including one of my first entries into the Whitney Museum as an intern, to being mentored by you know, a curator who was involved in Godzilla, and finally you know, becoming friends with Karen Higa, who the book is dedicated to, who really, I think, you know, just her support and just her model as being a curator, a historian, and just a decent person and friend and citizen. All those activities continue to, you know, like really inform what I want to do and how I want to do it. And then next week there's going to be a panel on her work and her writings at JANM, the Japanese American National Museum, and there's going to be another panel at Hammer to really celebrate her life's work and stuff like that. Just a few more things before. Maybe I'll just fast forward to maybe just getting started, because you know, really this was a pandemic project. I started threaded through the personal, then it became kind of like pulling a thread in which I was like, okay, what were these people who pushed the boat along for me? What were they involved in throughout time? So I started looking into, I think they were involved in this thing called Godzilla, right? So I started kind of looking into that, and it was during kind of the pandemic moment where there was obviously kind of heightened, I don't know, like interest and anxiety about Asian visibility in America. And so I was just kind of started being interested in those things. I'll read a few things. So at the beginning of the pandemic, when things were locked down in New York, I found myself at home and online like everyone else, trying to speculate what might happen. This was during an anxious period when stories of scapegoating anti-Asian violence were beginning to emerge, along with the other simmering social tensions leading up to the Black Lives Matter uprising. At the onset of the pandemic, people in our community had a heightened awareness of how COVID-19 as a virus was being racialized as an Asian contagion. In New York City, the streets were empty, and each time I was outside, I had to mentally prepare myself. And I often found myself thinking about the strange perils of visibility in America as I left the house masked as another layer of armor in public. Around the same time, I came across an exhibition listing for a Godzilla show, which was scheduled to open that spring at the Museum of Chinese Americas in New York. I was familiar with the history of the collective because I've known Godzilla members over the years from working in the art field. I also knew the importance of the legacy of Godzilla was in their success in bringing visibility to Asian American artists during the 90s, alongside other struggles for institutional representation by historically underrepresented people. After seeing the announcement, I became fixated on the two types of visibility at hand: a visibility that you seek and one that you avoid because it draws violence. The tension between these modes have always existed in everyday life, but the pandemic heightened it to an extreme. And it got me thinking about the visibility that marginalized people struggled for and the actual representations dealt to them in American society. And luckily, by coincidence, I was catching up with a friend who is the executive editor of Primary Information, which is an independent art press, which is really amazing, based in New York. And I mentioned that these thoughts that were kindled by Godzilla. And long story short, he also had an interest in Godzilla's history, and it was perfect timing. So he asked me to edit a book chronicling the collective, and I began my research and piecing together the 10-year history of Godzilla. So it became kind of like an obsessive project of calling people, cold emailing, and asking what, gathering anecdotes and material, and bringing my scanner to scan the material, going into the archives of NYU to piece the thing together. And over the course of the year, I interviewed Godzilla members, visited and scanned their archives, and pieced together all these histories, and then bracketed by an introduction that I wrote. Because a lot of the things is, yes, it's a subjective history, an archive in itself, because there's a specific trajectory that I wanted to map out, particularly kind of like the contextual events that were happening, but also the language that people use to describe a condition. It's kind of like, I'm kind of nostalgic for not having the right words, to describe a feeling or a condition or an affect about being an artist or a curator in society. And I kind of like it because it feels less overdetermined. Like here we have so many labels and names that we kind of, I like the not knowingness, or and maybe even the hope of like maybe language won't catch up with what you're trying to fight against. So this book was released in 2021, and it was immediately the most reviewed title for the publisher, and it was listed in multiple books top 10 lists for that year, including best books, art books of the year for the New York Times. And all these accolades are a testament to the importance of Godzilla's history and efforts by members over the years, which spanned not only just this period, but really is an inheritor of the politics and the radical politics of the 60s. And it's been interesting to track the kind of arc and movement from a radical politics to reformist to a post-reformist project that maybe we find ourselves in here. I don't even know what we're calling what is going on now. So that's something to kind of think about too. So I don't want to talk too much, but I think the best way, there's only 4 questions I'm just going to kind of pose broadly, but ideally we can open it up to conversation and talk back. So maybe I'll start out with Arlan and Betty, maybe Betty first, to talk about how you got involved in Godzilla, just broad brushstrokes, and your experience of being in Godzilla on either coasts. I'm interested in the idea of how your involvement, kind of long distance, kind of like felt, and all those things.
Sure. A lot of it was sort of fortuitous. I want to just give credit to my trip to Cuba in 1988 that opened up a world of thinking about art in a really dynamic way that affects the community and is, there's the word ashe, that is an African traditional word, religious, spiritual word, that really is about making art happen, be the thing that happens, that changes life, for instance. And so, I mean, that's a big ask. But there were pieces in the Havana Biennale in 1988 that really were tremendously powerful and moving. I also, Yang Soo-min and I were at UC Berkeley in graduate school, so when I went to New York, I'd visit Yang and stay at her place. And she's one of the Godzilla people in the beginning. And let me see, I got fired up about this representation in the community. An Asian American Women Artists Association was formed in '89, and I was co-founder with Flo Oi Huang, and we created a slide show to show people, about 50 artists at Mills College, that slides of their work. And it was helped by Moira Roth, who was professor there, and so we kind of, we're very self-conscious and intentional about talking about Asian American women artists because nobody else was. I mean, that was the vacuum that we put ourselves into, and it really has some repercussions. And so one of the things was a little bit of an art anthology or some book about Asian American art that I got involved in this project with Elaine Kim and Moira Roth at Temple University. That brought me, we got a grant, and I went to New York to do more research. And there I was staying with Yang Sim, so she told me about Godzilla, it was 91, I think. So it was the very beginning. Maybe it was the second or third meeting, whatever it was. I had some space to show the slides from the West Coast that I brought with me. So that was energizing. And I met Ken Chu there, who had an apartment. He had a 3-bedroom flat, and 1 bedroom was empty, and I needed a place to stay for 6 months, so I got to stay with Ken. And he is a founder, really centerpiece in a way for Godzilla. His way of being kind of animated the formation of Godzilla, I think. And it was a great treat to be in that environment with Ken and have him give me places to visit, people to see, things like that. So I did interview about 50 artists in New York and compile records, but unfortunately my part of that research thing went south, and we don't have any more of those slides. The book that took place after I left, was edited by Elaine Kim, and Margot Machida took my place. So Margot's role as an art historian was very important to seeing that project. I don't know what the name of that book is, but anyway, it's there. It's here somewhere. And so that was my introduction to Godzilla, and I was so excited by Godzilla, seeing a room full, 50 people, Asian American artists, and all different kinds, really. It was really exciting to have that. And so I thought about doing Godzilla West when I came back out here.
So yeah, oops, sorry, my phone. So this book reprints a lot of the writings and newsletters that were published during that time. They were so prolific and organized, that you get the sense of like what people were doing on the West Coast and East Coast, and even in the newsletters, there's listings for exhibitions. So it's like almost like even an artist that you don't recognize, it's almost like a visual kind of like materialization of a culture and a cultural production that's happening from a certain subject position that is being named. And I thought the other thing that's interesting that I want to point out that in the book is that yes, like Godzilla wasn't just happening in a vacuum of art. It was intersecting with like feminist projects, with AIDS awareness and then AIDS, public health policy.
That's right.
Projects. So Ken Chu,
Definitely.
who was so involved in ACT UP, imported all the tactics, visibility tactics that came from ACT UP into Godzilla. And there were so many more things. So there's a listing of just, not even exhaustive, like how everybody was involved in something else, was bringing that energy into this project itself. And it wasn't their primary project even at the time. So, and the other thing that's interesting about the form of Godzilla, it had an anarchic kind of strain to it. There's no, even though we say like Ken was the founder and leader, I think he would shy away.
Right.
He would shy away from that. Yeah. So it's like the idea of an anarchic reformist project is kind of like blows my mind. Like it's kind of like doesn't really, but it worked, for what it was doing. They set up a very specific goal, and they imported or they shared tactical strategies and tried to employ an anarchic structure. So maybe Arlan can talk about what was brought through the threads from the 70s and 80s up to that time.
Maybe I should bring up my notes from.
Yeah, you want me to print something up?
No, I have some notes.
Okay, yeah.
That, okay.
So
Hold
maybe,
on.
Arlan wrote something.
so maybe we'll just do light banter.
Yeah, right. No, I can't answer. Well, I did go to a few meetings, and it really had a sense of spontaneous organization, kind of like, where people disagree about things, but people are, happy to get together. I think that was a good sense of where things were. Some people have worked more than others, and some people had, they just were varying energies. But that itself was exciting to see how big the community, in a way. It wasn't community, it was just like getting to know people.
Yeah, like I think the social aspect of it, like the idea of social is political, seemed to be okay then. Like, like the idea it's okay to party or to show each other work and to share food and then there were projects, breakout groups that were working on different broad spectrum of political activities, and then some people were there just to advance their professional kind of aspirations too. So seemed like it was accommodating to those things, that maybe in this bigger tent wouldn't have worked in kind of previous collectivities.
Well, I was really privileged to be interviewing artists and using that as a way to talk to people who were not necessarily, who were artists, but who weren't necessarily even interested in Godzilla. In a way, it was like there are artists, wonderful, who didn't have, who created their own connection to the art world that was around them, It's hard to categorize, in a way, I think. Does that say anything?
Yeah, I think everybody has their own version of what this place or this collective was. So I like that idea that it had a multitudinous kind of like presence in people's heads and stuff like that.
Yes, I would like to thank B and Harvey, and especially Sharon.
Oh, what do you mean?
For hosting this. She is the dynamo. She is the dynamo of this place.
I just got here.
I would like to begin by saying that my studio sits on the land of the Lenape Hoking people in Brooklyn, New York. And to ask the question, where are the Lenape now, is to begin understanding American history. I would like to say that this book is an amazing book. When Howie was doing the book and he would call me and ask me for if I had this, if I had that, what else do I have, I really didn't know what he was accumulating or how the book was going to turn out. And so when the book came out, it was stunning because it's not your normal book. It's actually an accumulation of everything that he had collected from all these people. And I figured, man, I'm from Godzilla, I know everything. But actually, I knew very little after reading his book. All the things that went on, all the little notes from other people, it adds up to this pretty amazing thing that happened. And the thing is, you don't plan it. We didn't plan doing this. The formation of this group came about actually from a couple of people who were disgruntled with one community organization they were working with. In terms of
Oops.
hello?
Lost.
Is it me or you?
It's me.
You sure?
Yeah.
The Walter Cronkite one? This is okay, right? Yeah. So, just to give you a little background on the lay of the land during that time.
Sorry.
So the main Asian American organization in New York was Asian American Arts Center in Chinatown, and it's been around for a while. And they had a certain way of doing things. The three founders of Godzilla, Margo Machida, Bing Lee, and Ken Chiu. That's it. Everyone else is after them. So let's see, Bing worked for Asian American Center, Margo, and all three of them worked. And they saw the limitations, and they wanted to do, they were talking about maybe getting some group which was more nimble. And along with this, there was sort of like this cheap lunch group that formed in Chinatown. And I was part of that group. And we would find the cheapest restaurants to have lunch. Every week we would meet. And so this is how word kind of spreads. And then we have other connections with other people. I have connections with a group which was Basement Workshop, which was 20 years before Godzilla. So I would keep in contact with them. And Margot also came from Basement. So they called a meeting and said, well, you know, maybe we should try doing a group. And so their assignment was to get 2 more people each. So I was asked by Bing, and who else? Young Soon was asked, Byron Kim, Tamia Rai, and a few other people. And that was the first meeting that we had as a group. So it's not a spontaneous thing, but it comes out of necessity. Because they just wanted a more nimble group to get things going. I could go into some other things, but if you would like to hear.
I like, you know, that's how, through the archive, like, you know, reprinting documents, reprinting personal notes from individual members, reprinting meeting minutes. The idea is like to recreate kind of like materially what it meant or what it felt like or what the language was of being in kind of a rhizomatic social organization, right? Like, and what that feels like kind of from the first person when you see somebody's notes about some kind of meeting or strategy thing, like the kind of the fractal kind of perspective that you get from that person, but then you can zoom out and go, oh, this, as an organization, they presented this writing or this newsletter. So it's kind of toggling. I was just thinking about the iHotel, kind of like the idea of like how can you present kind of that fractal view through existing material, you know, and so like yeah, that was kind of a challenge too, but also kind of give contours to it. I wanted to show that during that time there was you know, interest in addressing you know, imperialism, racism, institution, you know, AIDS crisis, the war in Iraq, all those things. Just this, you know, it's not just in a vacuum where people just want to get their paintings into cultural institutions. It was informed and intersected by all these different struggles and interests.
I think that was very real, the very anti-colonial implications of what that meant in a major scale culturally, economically, and were particularly fired up by the Havana Biennale and the Third World, you know, non-aligned community that is global in nature and that had so much, you know, power to it. So I think that's something that the anti-colonial impetus, people would talk about it now. Maybe it's more real than it was then in a way, but it's hard to assess how deeply that is. In a way, it's a bigger reality now than it was then. Then it was more like an idea. And but the world economic situation is such now that maybe anti-colonialism is much more evident, you know. So, but what does that mean for people now? It isn't an easy situation, actually. And it isn't necessarily hopeful even, because it has kind of disaster written across it. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I think that leads to the next question I have that also speaks to kind of like the conversations that I was having before this talk and even at the symposium at Stanford at the Cantor Center, is kind of the intersection of art and politics, and if, you know, the place of art, you know, of art, there are so many models that were being put out, you know, like that, whether art is in service of a politics or in conjunction with the politics, or if it's a decadent cultural outgrowth of a society that has nothing to do with politics. Or the question I have is like speaks to you as individual, as artists, because the quantum here is like individual artists in a collective. Can you talk about what your art was then and your relationship to a collective group that maybe had political advocacy aims? How did you negotiate, toggling from the space of your studio, making like abstract paintings or subject matter that is not literal or in service, or could be an allegory for a politics or anything? How were you what did it look like, and what were you navigating in your practices then?
You want to go, Arlan?
Sure. Is this working?
Hope so.
Okay. Do I have to turn it on? Is it working?
I think it should be on.
Hello? Is it working?
Maybe use that big one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's the way it was. Should I just put this on here? Yeah. Okay, how's that?
Better.
All right. What was the question? What were we talking about?
How did you reconcile your own artistic practice and the politics that you were trying to enact collectively?
Okay, so during that time, I was just kind of, my art has always had two roads, and it's always been a problem. I could never rectify. One road is always the community road, where you do the art to serve the people for the community. But I also had this other path, which was about the art world. And that's where the ambition lied for making a living. So then, the art actually is different. And so, I could never rectify the two roads to make them one. So it was always kind of separate. And at that time, I was pretty much not doing any more community work. I had already burnt out from the revolutionary zeal of that time. And I was turning back into easel painting and that road of the dominant art world. But I still had lunch with these guys, right? These girls, and you always have these connections. And so when Bing said, "Hey, we're gonna try and start a new group. We're gonna start, and we're going to challenge for a new world order." I said, "Get out of here! We're gonna do this again." And I said, "Okay, why not? We'll give it a go." So my community path was always guided by this phrase from Chrissy Jima, Nobuko Miyamoto, and Charlie Chin, one of their songs, where they say, "We don't want a piece of your pie. We want to bake our own." So I was guided by that for the longest time, and through my revolutionary zeal. But once I burnt out, and I just didn't, I didn't want to hear it anymore. And so Bing offered me this opportunity that, okay, New World Order, we want inclusion. Okay, I'll take a piece of the pie. And so that's how I got into Godzilla. And but it turned out to be a pretty cool thing. The first meeting, I can tell you what we did in the first meeting. And the hope was to challenge the status quo, to establish our ground, to crush a few institutions in the process, but we really wanted to establish an international Asian American art network. But we had so many people from different generations and a bunch of young kids who were they were ready to bust out in the art world. So we had this session on what did we learn from the past 20 years. And so the lessons from the past were no 501c3 nonprofit status, no formal structure, no requirement to be a member, no hierarchy, no strings attached, and never monolithic. Well, what does that mean? That means that if someone proposed a show and you wanted to be in it, you're in it. And if membership, if you came to a meeting, you're part of Godzilla. And if you didn't like it, don't be in it. It's okay because there's going to be another show coming up. That's how it ran. And yes. Anything else?
That sounds good. Yeah, I feel like I tried with my paintings to do what my thinking was. I'll say that. And actually, there is a lot of biography in my paintings that have gone from like art world, abstract, kind of real ideas in color, and that was my orientation. But in 1980, I kind of say this thing that Ronald Reagan made me join the Communist Party because I felt like you just have to do everything. So that I threw my lot in with that, and that kind of changed my viewpoint and made it bigger than I was. So my paintings got 9 feet tall and 5.5 feet wide, and what am I doing with these big paintings? I mean, that's so non-democratic because they're huge paintings. They don't go in people's houses and stuff like that. There's a huge contradiction in terms of who the audience was. And so that was really kind of gripping, actually. I had to struggle with that and kind of, relate. And certainly the idea, because Berkeley and all of the accoutrements of studio art, fine art, drama, and everything, I was part of that. I was a part of the institution on that. And I could also see where it fell short for me and where others, barreled on like that. For one thing, everybody wanted to go to New York, and I resisted. Big deal. I mean, so people went to New York right away. They were going regularly and stuff like that. But I held off valiantly, I guess, and doing my political work, really, getting involved in art and community, how Art Against Apartheid in '84, the anti-apartheid movement really had a lot to say for artists and globally. And there was a presence of anti-apartheid art that I thought was worth bringing forth here, So for instance, I made a little painting that had a fist, that was in this kind of thick configuration that was the symbol for the African National Congress. And I painted in the ANC colors and submitted it to the KQED auction, where they put up a picture of the thing, of the donation, and then say the title twice. That was their promise. So the title is, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, apartheid has got to go." So then I saw it. It was about midnight at the KQED auction. It was up there, "Hey, hey, ho, ho," like that. And some people reacted. They happened to be observing that too, and so they sent me a note or something about it. So anyway, that was a kind of activism that was possible, I think. Also doing stuff on the street, having people make their mark. I set up canvases at San Francisco State, and artists, we kind of try to encourage people to do art and make your mark, make a statement like that. So that was one thing to do. And aside from the more political stuff, like associating with homeless in Oakland and having demonstrations, that kind of thing, sleeping overnight on East 14th Street with my daughter, who was about 5 years old. So, you go through all kinds of things. And then I did go to Cuba, and that was, as I said, very, it spoke to me a lot for those interests of political organizing and art as a really dynamic energy that I carried to the 90s, where I got involved with more African religion. And, so I left the party, and when it dissolved, 1990 or something like that, it imploded. And then I became involved in the African traditional religion, which is also a little bit marginal. It isn't really what you would consider. So I studied Yoruba for a couple of years, and it affected my painting. And I tried to paint, the orishas, that are the deities of energy. And so I tried to bring art into what I was doing. Okay, in the 80s when I was, I thought it would be subversive to paint abstractly anti-American, whatever, sentiment, the flag tearing up, the colors, red, white, and blue, being subverted abstractly like that. It would hang in a gallery or something, and that was my kind of statement. And I also thought I did things that were more overtly political, like an allegory of Cuba and comparing Havana to New York, that kind of thing. And I felt like I was painting for the Socialist Museum of the Future. That was a little...
So Betty, I have some questions about, so you're doing activist art, and the subjects and the process is more representational.
No,
No?
it was abstract. Although I did try to be representational because I had a significant conversation with Rupert Garcia.
Yeah.
And we were driving across the bridge, and I said, really, Rupert, do you have to have representation to be
Yes.
political? And he said, yes. And then after that, he became more abstract, okay? So, but I did try to do that, but it failed me or I failed it. No.
So then, when you're doing abstract, then so do you feel that people understand that, and it gets across the same message politically?
No, I realized, there were paintings and whatever, this anti-U.S. painting in a gallery exhibit, and students. There was one exhibit where students were asked to write their responses, and I read the responses were given to me, and I could see that the responses were sometimes 180 degrees the opposite. They thought it was rousing, more patriotic than I had intended. So I feel like after I paint something and it's done, then it's out there, it has a life of its own. It's like a kid.
I mean, for those who are, it sounds like jazz talk or inside baseball, who are not in the arts. Just, when you think about, in the Asian American context, when they say the burden of representation, they usually talk about the person, and how they are represented in media and in public. And I think there's this curious kind of like grafting of the burden of representation onto the canvas painting here. We're talking about abstraction and figuration as the tension between it becomes an allegory for the political. It's like, is it representing the message or what's inside as an expression? There's a sense that figuration can deliver the truth better, than abstraction. But as artists, you're always, you're trying to, as in the social, you're kind of pushing the line of abstracting, pushing, what something literal or figurative is. So that's why seems like there's a strange stake about abstraction and figuration, public and private practice. In private, you may paint for yourself abstractly, but then if you're involved in a collective movement that has a political point, there's a responsibility for maybe that cultural product to represent something. So that's, in a way, it's a kind of like a weird kind of projection of burden of representation, not about being Asian in Hollywood, but kind of like what are the stakes of it in the line or the drawing or the word, if you're a writer or a musician too.
Yeah, I think that the role of art can be very powerful in a movement, and I was wondering, how did you see that struggle in New York Chinatown over at the jail that was being built? I mean, what kind of role did Godzilla play in that, and how did your art,
You mean the recent jail issue? Oh, okay. I can. Well, let me give you a little bit of background. So let me just look at my notes, the dates again. So Godzilla's been everyone's been disbanded since 2001. Nobody's seen any we don't keep in contact. Just some of the few of us who are still in New York, who are close by, keep in contact. But Godzilla is national, and it's international. Betty is in the West Coast. And so on the date, let me see, January 18, 2019, Herb Tam and Ryan Huang of the Museum of the Chinese in America announces that they have a huge grant from the Annie Warhol Foundation to do a show on Godzilla, a historical show, and they were really excited. It was a great opportunity to bring back what this group had accomplished. And we had this great reunion. It was really magic. I haven't seen people in 20 years. And so everything went well until this jail issue came up. And so what it was the city announced that there was going to be a 4-borough jail program, and they're going to build new jails and tear down some of the Rikers and some other jails. And one was to be built in Chinatown. So there was a dispute between community groups in Chinatown and MoCA. And some artists from Godzilla supported the community, and some supported MoCA. Let me just see. Oh yeah, so then after a year of this huge deliberation, 11 Godzilla artists been dialoguing with MoCA, and 11 asked MoCA to participate in a public forum moderated by a neutral facilitator so that we can get all the facts straight. Because all these rumors were flying all over the place. And so it was an opportunity for MoCA to explain how they received $35 million as a community give back in connection with the jail program. And MoCA said no. And so after that, 19 out of 33 Godzilla artists withdrew from the show. And then soon after that, Herb Tam canceled the show. And so that's pretty much what happened. And so there is so much noise around it, and all the facts are askewed. And so this is as close as I can get to what Godzilla did and what they asked the museum to do.
What about the role of art in politics in that case?
Well, that was an interesting thing. So there's 2 people who wrote the first letter against MoCA. It was me and Tamiya Arai. And so we just, okay, we're out of the show, forget it. And then halfway about, maybe 6 months later, we get this news, Tamiya gets these notes from one of the Godzilla meetings. So we told them, don't give us any more emails, we don't want to hear anything. But they did, and Tamiya, being the nosy person, she reads it all. And she sees that, hey, did you read this? Herb Tam is going to use our letter in the show. And it's part of, I don't know what you would call it, but it's part of, it's art washing. It's the museum using our letter as an example of how they are liberal and how they will accept our protest, but the show goes on. And they're actually using our protest as part of their show. So that pretty much incensed us, and then so we decided to mobilize. And that's what led up to the cancellation of the show. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like I'm just thinking just as a kind of like an observer, like just thinking about, yes, there were different artworks from individual artists from Godzilla that would be in the show, varying from abstract to the political. But in the case of the artists who withdrew, whether they were painting abstractions or making kind of public art, muralist, that art became kind of a collective instrument.
Yes.
Right? So to really address a rupture or a crisis in the institution, which is a crisis of an institution that wanted to narrate politics but not embody it itself. And that contradiction was at the core of something like Godzilla's thing. Like if the reformist project, how do you know if you're getting anywhere? Right? You're chiropracting an institution to a certain point, but when is it acceptable and unacceptable, right? So luckily, I mean, not luckily, the jail issue is unfortunate in so many ways, but it became kind of a flashpoint where you had to confront this, right? Like maybe the reformist efforts, and it was kind of best laid out, like, we want to hold you accountable, we want to be in dialogue, there's going to be a neutral observer, right, the mediator. All those things were put forth like in a good liberal sense, reformist sense, but I think at a certain point there was a decision by groups, a few different groups, to either stay on or to make art that, whatever that is. I don't think any artist wants to be instrumentalized. They don't want their paintings to be instrumentalized, or even their own practice. So I think this kind of toggling from the individual, like the quantum individual, to a collective, was necessary at that point, And I think artists do that individually too, as an individual protest. But I think for me, like, out of all the protests that happened during the BLM, George Floyd moment, in the contemporary art landscape, this was one of the withdrawals that actually precipitated a canceling of an exhibition, which is different from the Whitney Biennial, which was drawing so much kind of controversy, and there were a few withdrawals that were seen as performative, or maybe whatever, there are other ways of looking at it, but it never precipitated maybe something as radical as this, which is a cancellation of a show. And there's continuing protests to underline the contradiction within the community. So it has the kind of long-lasting effects that I think where art and politics, kind of collided.
Yeah. Thanks, Howie. You're so good at that.
No, this thing just makes me look like I know what I'm saying. But, maybe we could.
I think that's really a great issue, because the framing is it's control, right? The context of an exhibit and people's careers, everything like that is pretty central to the artwork. And to talk about that without really looking at what the art is about, for instance, it's really about representation on that level, is that right? And
Yes.
How you're going to control that. And I think, don't you think that art is often used in that way regardless? I mean, what happened in Chinatown was very, graphic, practically was either or, kind of like, but there are exhibits that are organized by the U.S. Information Agency, what is that, USAID, something that really use art in a political way all over the world, so.
Sure, it happens in every museum.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can open it up now, because I feel like it's opening up beyond art to talk about these issues, how it links up with personal politics and the collective, or just technical questions like what the hell are you guys talking about too. I'm okay with that.
I just wanted to add that in the activist years, there was a big demand for banners. So I did end up painting a lot of banners. I mean, that's the practical side of being involved with arts activism, is doing the banners for all kinds of organizations and stuff like that.
Maybe Cheryl, do you have any?
Hello? Hello? What kind of
There's
art?
a question back
Oh, there's a question. Let's do that question.
Yes, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone. I want to ask you, let me know if you cannot hear me. You mentioned a lot of connections with African American movements and African American art way back, right? From the very beginning of your involvement. When I spoke to other artists here too, they had a very strong connection with Black Panthers. And so I'm curious to see, how was that shaped in the East Coast, and what is the shape of that now? Since you mentioned activism after the Black Lives Matter, what is there similar space, or what are the speed bumps to create these coalitions across artists or different ethnic groups and racial groups?
Well, I think for my generation, there's not much. Not much at all. Some of the younger kids are doing it, and they they have and are in other coalitions. And I have one friend, Tamia Rai, who continues to make bridges, and she is in various groups, and she's in a position to make these bridges, and that's how that happened. I have not joined any of those coalitions. But it's an interesting question because it gets back to what Howie's talking about is the burden of representation. So then as an individual, I do not have that much contact with people of color besides, back and forth in the street, in the subway and all that. So then when I wake up every day, I have to make that decision whether I'm going to deal with the burden of representation or just, go about my way. And so the burden of representation, at the heart of it, is about stereotype. And so you have to deal with your stereotype when you are confronted with a person of color. And so how I deal with that is when I go fishing on a boat. And the boat, there's this one boat that we go on, it's all black. The captain is black, and we fish for. And so I'm fishing with these black fishermen. So that is an opportunity for me to represent myself as an Asian person and to project and to offer my fellow fishermen a different type of Asian. And so it's a very small thing to do, but it's a very individual way of expanding what the stereotype is. And so in that way, I get to exchange one-on-one with another person. And that's how I kind of deal with it. I go fishing a lot, so.
You do a lot of work.
Right back there.
I remember I was hearing a lot about different connections that were made with the organization, and I was wondering, what kinds of connections are there between what you guys have done in the past and what people are doing in the present?
And what?
What kinds of connections are there between what you all were doing in the past and what people have been doing now in the present?
I mean, I can't answer for everybody. I think I just wanted to bounce off something that is in the air about how how are we able to create solidarities today, and I think obviously it doesn't look like what it used to look like, kind of either third world internationalism or kind of something primordial in terms of coexisting struggles. It's much more atomized, and I think solidarities I think the solidarities that I'm tracking and trying to support are ones that are not around cultural national identities, that are just kind of giant silos. We can think about labor or even specific to sex workers or trans queer politics, all things that are what they call intersectional in kind of institutional terms, but things that demand a more specific type of solidarity that maybe evades what we know as the image of identity. So those are things that those spaces I'm interested in, or how carceral politics can be addressed from different kind of subject positions too. I think what makes it hard is something like DEI, or institutional intersectionalism. That kind of institutional narrative, let's say, really diffuses, or at least is distraction to actual kind of solidarities I was mentioning that it's actually happening in queer, carceral, and labor kind of spaces. So a lot of times it tries to takes the place for actual organizing and action. So they're like, don't worry, we're doing it for you. Look, as an institution, we can actually critique ourselves and reform ourselves. And it's hard because a lot of the faces that are actually saying those things are the rainbow, right? The rainbow of peoples that they're hiring. And I was just in a conversation after a panel about how, certain times somebody on stage is saying something very heartfelt, but as an institutional kind of like, agent. So there's a dissonance between hearing a rhetoric or a message from a specific person speaking for the institution. It's kind of a Janus face kind of experience, right? You're kind of like trying to assess the person and the institution at the same time, and who's speaking at that moment. So you can speak to a director of a nonprofit at a bar, and they're telling you something, and you're vibing off it. But the same person on stage is saying something else. They're speaking for the institution, So that's what we're negotiating all the time, because we're both agents and autonomous, people in general. And I think that's the dissonance of the active life, right? To assess speech and action, on a contingent basis, in situ, in conditions, in here or out there. So like being on a boat, right, or being at your job, or being in line in a pharmacy. That's all kind of spaces that you have to kind of toggle between those dissonances.
Well, I'll say that actually, I've been noticing that my world has really become much more Asian American than it had been. Really, my volunteering is with a senior Asian American and Japanese American. It's largely Japanese American senior group, Sakura Kai, and different events in the Japanese American community, and I'm there's a lot more there than I had known before, and my associations with other communities of color or doing stuff together, that's kind of in some ways dissipated. There's some strands that have come back, efforts to get back together with Women of Color Camp, but it's a lot more intentional in a way, and which I appreciate. That's important to me, but it has a different quality than I had before. So maybe that's, of course, age related, and but I really like having more a multicultural kind of a real solid relationship with people of color that's more active. But the pandemic certainly squashed a lot of that, and I'm not sure where to find it now in this nowadays. But it brings up this whole idea of you mentioned intersectionality, which is a huge, huge concept that brings these edges together, right? The trans and carceral, all the ones that are pushed to the edges, they are part of intersectionality as a force that is needed to make change, right? That's a different reality. They have to be part of the picture, and to have that picture means there's a big change, and that's what I think. And I'm not. I think that is what's needed, what can happen, but it's really a huge. I don't know where it's going to come from.
Yeah, I like that. I was just thinking about in this book, there are exhibitions that are and like talks that are what we would call intersectional, but it was much more organic, right? It was like kind of like you have Amri Baraka, Bell Hooks next to Tomei Rai, and there was exhibitions that were Black, Brown, and Asian, but once you give the name, where it's like, well, let's create an intersectional event, I don't think anybody sets out to, let's be free people now, I think, so it's like once you give it a name, right, you've captured it already, so that's why when we talk about abstraction or figuration, there's just an allegory for these things, like that, the ineffable, or the kind of pre-reified thing and the reified thing. So like DEI is literally kind of like illustration, and it's not politics. So I think that's where we're trying to intimate. So like ideally this space, this talk, or even this book, or even the jail issue, it's not an Asian American issue or Chinatown issue. You know, it affects like the incarceration and funding of cultural institutions, and you know, the individual versus the collective, reform versus transformation. All those things are cuts across society in ways that I think are more than just Asian American or or whatever projects there are out there.
Hi everyone. Hi Arlan. Betty. I think you don't recognize me, but Betty, we met in Havana in 1989. I joined Godzilla in 91. I'm Arlan D'Souza.
Alan,
Oh,
how are you?
oh wow.
So I wanted to add just a little bit to some of those questions, because I think, Godzilla, again, to emphasize that, we use the term Asian American as a kind of coalition. It's already a coalition. But I wanted to emphasize that the members were really working in very different ways. They had very different politics, and pursue those politics in very different ways in relation to institutions, the art world, community, and so on. So that was already a coalition. That was coalition politics already. Coming together as Godzilla. People were, as you mentioned, Howie, like Ken Chu involved with AIDS. A lot of the members were involved in AIDS and personally living with AIDS or doing direct community work, activist work around that. People were still involved in the aftermath of the Vietnam War and the consequent migrations that resulted from that. There's Thatcherism, there's Reaganism. We're still dealing with all of that. Anti-apartheid. And Godzilla was also the opportunity for a lot of people to start working with institutions, and art institutions, in different ways.
Could you click the switch?
Turn it on before he does that. A lot of people. Well, actually, I came from Britain and became part of Godzilla in '91, and I was working in London as part of Black British Movement. And those politics transferred for me to Godzilla. Again, something that's already coalitional. We use Trinity Minha's terminology of there's always a first world within the third, and a third world within the first. Our organizing motto in London as part of the group I was there was Third World, First Nation. And those politics continue to Godzilla. Yongsun and I did a lot of work together. From AIDS to safe sex, to the DMZ, to different forms of immigration patterns that to the US. So just that Godzilla was already coalitional, and was a springboard to work in so many different ways. That work still continues. It's not like we've all given it up. We've adapted it to the times.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, well,
Thank you.
thanks.
Great to see you.
Yeah.
Is that Alan?
Yeah, so
Yes.
Is that Alan?
I'm so
Hi, Alan. No kidding.
yeah, hi.
My God.
Thank you for coming. So in this book,
Godzilla.
there's some great writing that there's a newsletter. There's also a magazine dedicated to kind of like what you're talking about, kind of like the coalition and kind of like even the kind of exploding the category of what Asian diaspora is in America, kind of. So I think it's I really enjoyed the pieces that you wrote in those. But I think it's also like, the collapse of, let's say, the way history collapses this project, or the way they collapse Asian American projects, it erases the kind of the multitude and perspectives, the fractal perspectives that I think. So the idea is to kind of like to keep pushing it out, so it doesn't become a genre-based art, that's very specific to a very specific procedure, historical material procedure. That's one way of presenting what Asian American art is, and I think, this moment was kind of messy and spilling everywhere in good ways and being informed from different geographies and migrations and historical conditions. So, yeah, thank you for that.
I guess I would like to also say that Godzilla is never monolithic, never. And there are people in Godzilla who wanted to advance their careers in the art world, and that was fine too. So that was the type of group it was. Great seeing you, Alan.
Hi. Yeah, I really appreciate the anarchic and fractal nature of the collective. And I guess I was wondering, does anything come to mind as far as elements or approaches that kept the collective moving and powerful and serendipitous and coalitional? And how did that sort of inform decisions being made?
I mean, I think that refusing to be a 501c nonprofit is key. Of course, you're going to be poor your entire career, but it gives you independence.
And maybe a relevance. There's a dependent. It depends on being relevant. A 501c3 is an institutional structure that is the relevance that people use, regardless of other things. Everything becomes part of the institution that way, keeping it going, the board of whatever, trustees and stuff like that. And that does mean that there's maybe a shorter life of a certain kind,
Yes.
I mean, Arlan said, even though Godzilla lasted 10 years, it went through a few administrations, and different kind of political engagements too. So the first administration and the first two up to 95 had a very specific kind of political bent that responding to all the conditions that Alan was kind of just mentioning. But then, 95 to 2000, it was much more kind of profession and opportunity making, and it doesn't have anything to say who the members were, what administrations were, but it was really how the terrain was moving. Institutions were really reacting quite quickly. Not maybe at the time it felt too slow, but they were starting to include artists. Okay, you want more inclusion? Sure. Here's a few things, and okay, we're hiring these people. So it became less about everybody. You can't go less than zero. People, you were a little bit more than zero. So okay, how can you kind of gauge where what the demands are and what progress is? So and so the professional aspect of it, I guess, took a little bit more of the forefront of activities. I don't think you were involved in that part, but because there was kind of an emergence of spaces and even in industry, of identity, cultural productions in ways that didn't exist,
some people
before.
Actually, maybe through Godzilla, did achieve a certain kind of experience with institution and some of the administrative whatever. I think Ken really worked through it. Ken Chu just took on the institution as something that he could relate to, right? With Dia, and trying to influence where its vision was and stuff like that. So he became active as an administrator for a very important arts organization and New York. So he tried, and then he saw a lot of things, and now it's, well, do you want me to say in a word?
Wow, what is it?
What he says about modern art, he can't stand it. So that's where it's gone now,
But it's also like, lifespan of I mean, 10 years is a pretty good run for, for something that is not 501c3 or have a mission statement. So it surfed these transformations. So in the introduction, I was trying to map out, how the conditions change. But when you hit the late 90s and 2000s, the globalism kind of replaced kind of like this idea of like pushing one identity category. It's like we are serving the globe. Wherever money capital is, we're gonna start showing Chinese art, or we're gonna and up until now, the kind of, we don't call it globalism. I don't know what regime this is, but even something like Asian American Art Initiative with an S, like there's so many initiatives that we're trying to figure out what are we addressing. Is it a visibility from the past, or a visibility of the present, or something cultural, nationally specific to here? Because a lot of times, a lot of these discourses don't translate. If you take this to Asia, like we don't even know what Asian American is. It's like it's a very specific subjectivity, and you're kind of like up against capital, right? And at that point, so whatever organization needs to be able to reconcile these things,
Just to get back to Ken. Ken is and always will be the heart and soul of Godzilla. He came out of ACT UP, and he had he brought to Godzilla a life that wasn't there before, and he used a lot of tactics from ACT UP. And Betty is correct. He went into the institution to try to make that change there. Creative capital, he was in that, and he burnt out, and he disappeared. But I just saw him last week, 2 weeks ago, and he's doing well. He's still living in New York, but in going forward after he burnt out, he's left art making, and he's left the art world in his wake. Nothing to do with it. He says he's come to term with white supremacy, and he's pretty good. And like I said yesterday, he remains my hero.
I mean, it's also like when people seek, it's not an exit, right? Like, it's, I think it's about like, I think about that a lot too. It's like, with something anarchic, or non-formal, like there is a time where you need to step aside or take, move to another space to live life or to start new projects. So I feel like that ability to go, okay, there's a new way of doing things, a new way of being, and there's other people that can take the reins of a space. I think that's what Godzilla was quite good at, and that's why there's 10 years, but it's 10 years of transformation.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Books are available for sale at the front, and please feel free to come up to them with any questions you also may have, and they'll sign your books. Let's give a hand to our amazing speakers. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and your ideas.
I want her.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for being here.
I'll have what she said.
Bye.
Cheryl, when you come up and answer some questions?
Yeah, you need it.
Why me?
I gotta step aside. You do this.
No, I know, I totally like that. Yeah, they're gonna be here. They're just gonna be modeling for you. Do whatever you want.
Hi.
Abby and Keisha for
Oh yeah.
Nice Eyes Language Vids.
Hey, what's up? Yeah.
Hi.
So you're on the West Coast?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, awesome.
Also, did you know of a group called API Force in the 90s?
What?
API Force.
API?
It's supposed to be like an anarchist Asian American group in the 90s.
Oh, really? No. Not as far. Not that one.
You have a cafe next to you, also?
Cafe?
So get shirt. Did you
Yeah.
create this?
No, this was left over from Godzilla days, and I got it recently.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Where did you get your shirt?
Huh?
How did you get it?
There was a
They remade it.